Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We are beginning a new canto today, so I had to go on a bit of a search to track down the paper copy. So it is Canto 10, Chapter 45, Text 1. I think I'm going to read the introduction to the chapter first, and then we can chant responsibly. So this is entitled, chapter 45 is entitled, Krishna Rescues His Teacher's Son. This chapter describes how Lord Krishna consoled Devaki, Vasudeva, and Nanda Maharaj and installed Ugrasena as king. It also relates how Krishna and Balaram completed their education, retrieved the dead son of their guru, and then returned home. Noting that his parents, Vasudeva and Devaki, had realized his true position as God, Sri Krishna expanded his Yoga Maya to again make them think of him as their dear child. Then, with Lord Balaram, Krishna approached them and said how unhappy he was that he and they had been unable to enjoy the mutual satisfaction of parents and children who lived together. Then he stated, quote, "Even in a lifetime of 100 years, no son can ever repay the debt he owes his parents, from whom he receives his very body. Any capable son who fails to support his parents will be forced in the hereafter to eat his own flesh. Indeed, any person who does not maintain and nourish those under his care, children, wife, spiritual masters, brahmanas, elderly parents, and so on, is simply a living corpse." Sorry. "It was out of fear of Kamsa that we could not serve you. So now, please forgive us," close quote. Vasudeva and Devaki, overcome with emotion upon hearing these words of Sri Krishna's, embraced their two sons and in ecstasy shed a torrent of tears. Having thus satisfied his mother and father, Lord Krishna offered Kamsa's kingdom to his maternal grandfather Ugrasena, and then arranged for all the family members who had fled in fear of Kamsa to return to their homes. Protected by the mighty arms of Krishna and Balaram, the Yadavas began to enjoy supreme bliss. Krishna and Balaram next approached Nanda Maharaj and praised him for having cared so lovingly for them, another's sons. Krishna then said to Nanda, quote, "Dear father, please return to Vraja, knowing how much you and the other relatives are suffering in separation from us, Balaram and I, will come to see you. I will come to see you as soon as we have satisfied your friends here in Mathura," close quote. Krishna then worshipped Nanda with various offerings, and Nanda felt overwhelmed with love for his sons. After tearfully embracing Krishna and Balaram, he took the cowherd men and departed for Vraja. Next, Vasudeva had his parents perform his son's ritual of second birth, Brahminical initiation. Krishna and Balaram then went to Garga Muni to take the vow of brahmacharya celibacy. Afterwards, Krishna and Balaram, though omniscient, desired to reside at the school of a spiritual master, and thus they went to live with Sandipani Muni in Avantipura. To teach the proper way to respect one's guru, Krishna and Balaram served their spiritual master with great devotion, as they would a deity of the Supreme Lord himself. Sandipani Muni, pleased by their services, imparted to them detailed knowledge of all the Vedas, together with their 6 corollaries and the Upanishads. Krishna and Balaram needed to hear each subject explained only once to assimilate it completely. And thus, in 64 days, they learned the 64 traditional arts. Before taking leave of their guru, the two lords offered Sandipani Muni any gift he desired. The wise Sandipani, seeing their amazing prowess, requested that they bring back his son, who had died in the ocean of Prabhas. Krishna and Balaram mounted a chariot and went to Prabhas, where they approached the shore and worshipped the presiding deity of the ocean. Krishna asked the ocean to return his spiritual master's son. And the Lord of the ocean replied that a demon dwelling within the ocean, named Pankajanya, had taken the boy away. Hearing this, Sri Krishna entered the ocean, killed the demon, and took the shell that had grown from his body. But when Krishna did not find his guru's son within the demon's belly, he went to the planet of Yamaraj, the Lord of Death. Yamaraj came forward when he heard Krishna blow his Panchajanya conch shell and devotedly worshipped him. Lord Krishna then asked Yamaraj for Sandipani Muni's son, and Yamaraj immediately gave him to the two lords. Krishna and Balaram then returned to their spiritual master and presented him with his son, requesting him to choose yet another favor. But Sandipani Muni replied that by having obtained disciples such as them, all his desires were fulfilled. He thus instructed them to return home. Krishna and Balaram traveled to their home by chariot, and upon their arrival, all the citizens became unlimitedly ecstatic to see them, just like persons who have regained a lost treasure. So that was the introduction to chapter 45, and we'll proceed with the text for today, which is text 1, so we can chant responsibly. Shri Shuko Vacha Pitarav Upalabartao Viditya Purushottama Mabut iti nijamayam Tatana jana mohinim Shishuko vacham Pitarav upalapartao Viditya Purushottama Mabudhichamayam Pitarav upalapartao Viditva Purushottama Mabudhiti Nijamayam Tatana Jana Mohinim Shishuko Vacha Pitarav Upala Parto Viditva Purushottama Mabud Iti Nijamayam Tatana Jana Mohinim Shishuko Vacha Pitarav Upala Parto Viditya Purushottama Mabud Iti Nijamayam Tatana Jana Mohinim Shishuko Vacha Pitarav Upala Parto Viditva Purushottama Mabud Iti Nijamayam Tatana Jana Mohinim The word for word. Shri Shuka Vacha, Shukadev Goswami said, Pitara, his parents, Upalabdha, having realized, Artha, the idea of his opulent position as God, Viditva, knowing, Purda Uttama, the Supreme Personality, Mabud Iditi, this should be, this should not be, Nizam, his personal, Mayan, illusory potency, Tatana, he expanded, Jana, his devotees, Mohinim, which bewilders. Okay. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshurin Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavam Sha Shri Rupa Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakha Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapsa Kanchana Gorangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpataribhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasnaya Bhutale Srimati Romapada Swami Iti Namine Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasnaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. And the translation for the verse and purport. Sukadev Goswami said, I, understanding that his parents were becoming aware of his transcendental opulences, the Supreme Personality of Godhead thought that this should not be allowed to happen. Thus, he expanded his yoga maya, which bewilders his devotees. Purport. if Vasudeva and Devaki would have seen Krishna as Almighty God, their intense love for him as their son would have been spoiled. Lord Krishna did not want this. Rather, the Lord wanted to enjoy with them the ecstatic love of Vatsalya Ras, the relationship between parents and children. As Srila Prabhupada often pointed out, although we normally think of God as the Supreme Father, in Krishna consciousness we can enter into the Lord's pastimes and play the part of his parents, thus intensifying our love for him. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points out that the word jana may be translated here as devotees, as in the verse Dhyananam na grinanta tana mat sevanam janaha. That's from Bhagavatam 3:29-13. He further explains that jana may also be translated as parents, since jana is derived from the verb jan, which in the causative form, janayate, means to generate or to give birth to. In this sense of the word, as in janani or janakau, the term Jana Mohini indicates that the Lord was about to expand his internal illusory potency so that Vasudeva and Devaki would again love him as their dear child. So, just to summarize again the chapter, everything that had been read, which was a rather long introduction to this chapter. One can say this chapter that we're going to be covering over many weeks has Krishna consoling Devaki and Vasudeva and sending Nanda and the cowherd men back to Vraja, installing Ugrasena as king, and going to Gurukul to absorb himself in study. So this very brief summary is actually from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Now, continuing with Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, this is him speaking. And this is in relation to this text 1. Understanding that his mother and father were endowed with the treasure of seeing him as Almighty God, Krishna began to consider, quote, "Let that perception vanish and let them be covered by the ecstasy of parental love, Vatsalya Rasa, so that both of us will attain supreme bliss." So as usual, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur actually has insight into Krishna's thinking process. So that was the thought that Krishna was actually having. So one can consider one very interesting verse, and I think it's so relevant to this particular text 1. It's a verse from Sri Tattva Sandarbha by Srila Jiva Goswami. It's text 8. And this is what he says, and I'm going to go into detail connected to this verse because it's very much interconnected with the dynamic that's happening in this text 1. So this is this text 8 from Sri Tattva Sandarbha. In the abstract feature of pure spiritual existence, the Supreme sometimes indeed goes in the Vedic texts by the name Brahman. In the partial expansion as the Lord of creation, that Supreme regulates the Maya potency of material nature and exerts his control through further personal expansions. By the single manifestation of his personality called Narayan, that Supreme rules sovereign in the transcendental sky beyond the universe. May that same Supreme Sri Krishna, the original Godhead, be pleased to grant pure love to those in the world who worship his feet. So that's the text. So by Srila Jiva Goswami's breakdown, there are three different aspects of the Absolute Truth. And those aspects are realized by different seekers of the Absolute Truth. And the last line, may Sri Krishna, the original Godhead, be pleased to grant pure love to those in the world who worship his feet. It identifies all of these aspects of the Absolute Truth, or all the manifestations of the original, as coming from the original Godhead, Sri Krishna. So the Absolute Truth, if he's abstracted from his personality, he's sometimes understood as the perfect source of all existence, one without a second. So this view is taught in the Vedic Upanishad. So we were hearing that Krishna and Balaram had, later on in the chapter, they're going to actually be studying the Upanishads. So in the same Upanishad, we find that there appears to philosophers who preferred the truth to remain impersonal, there's this teaching actually in the Upanishads of the Absolute Truth. And that teaching is God is the creator of this world. And Gopi Pranadhana, who does a commentary in Sri Tattva Sandarbha, he states that the concept of God, this concept of God, that he's the creator of the world, it's held by those who cannot imagine that God has any more important business to do. This is the biggest thing he has to do. He has to create the world. So they don't think that he's actually got some personal business, things that are important to him personally. So some other kind of business. It doesn't enter into persons who have this concept or hold this concept of God as the creator of the world. Then there's also the same Supreme Lord who does have, is not impersonal. So he's called Lord Narayan or Lord Vishnu. He's existing in the infinite spiritual world, and he's the object of worship of those devotees who are in awe of his supremacy. So more personalized concept of God being the creator. There's a kind of sense of awe, but there's relating that there's a personality there. So this is that Lord Vishnu that Vasudeva and Devaki are seeing. And it's said, they are endowed, and this is Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur referring to Vasudeva and Devaki, they are, quoting him, endowed with the treasure of seeing him as Almighty God. So it's actually a very precious view to have, to be able to see Lord Narayan. Now, ultimately, the absolute truth, and this was why I read from Sri Tattva Sandarbha Srila Jiva Goswami's text 8. The absolute truth is the Supreme Person. And he does have personal business, things that are important to him as a person. He shares intimate, loving exchanges with the best of his devotees. So it means what's important to him is his relationship with those that see him in that very personal way and actually want to have a relationship with him. And in fact, he accepts certain roles in which he's either equal to, or sometimes he even takes a subordinate position to them in those loving exchanges. So that's the that part or that concept of God that is not held by persons who cannot imagine that there's a personality with personal desires or personal business, so to speak, which is cultivating relationships and having loving exchanges with those that understand him to be a personality and him having this desire for personal exchanges. So this current purport of text 1 gives the reason why even having such a treasure of seeing the Supreme Lord in a state of awe of his supremacy is problematic. And the reason given is that the intense love for him as their son that Vasudeva and Devaki actually have would have been spoilt. So the shared loving exchange between them, between Lord Krishna and Vasudeva and Devaki, in the role of their son, would have been hampered. So it's a little difficult to be seeing Lord Narayan in the infinite spiritual world and feeling awe towards him, and at the same time carrying a perfect understanding of Krishna as being a loving personality whom they're actually seeing as their son. So it's two different kinds of perception, and it's very difficult to reconcile those two perceptions. And the higher one from Krishna's point of view, because that's the business that he's most concerned with, is having the loving exchanges with the two personalities that he's taken a subordinate role to, as seeing them as his mother and father. So Gopi Pranadhana, he states that only devotees who have taken shelter of Lord Krishna in the original most confidential form can experience such pure love. So there's purity of love where one is actually able to understand Krishna as an individual, as a loving being, and one's actually having a relationship with him in terms of like serving him in some way. He discusses, and this is Gopi Pranadhana Prabhu, that love of God in reverence, and says that technically official reverence can be called pure. So it's not that it's not pure. The purity factor is there. And this is quoting him. But that quality of love is not of the same transcendental order of perfection. That's how he puts it. It's quite a mouthful, but it's not on the same order of transcendental perfection. So you have the purity of having awe towards the Creator, there's purity in having that view, that perception. And there's also purity in terms of seeing Krishna in a particular role, like as the purport here puts it, one's consciousness in wishing to serve him is wishing to serve him as Devaki and Vasudeva are doing as parents. So there's purity in that, but it's different levels of transcendental perfection. That's how he puts it. So, and he explains. Now, drawing from his explanation because it's rather wonderful. So he puts it this way. Fear of God as the creator and judge of the worlds is only peripherally spiritual. And taking it to the extreme, why he's saying it's only on the edge of spirituality. He explains that the personality of the Supreme is made relative, and his essence is reduced to something nameless and formless. And then there can be no relationship with him at all. So I remember attending these interfaith meetings for some period of time, some years ago, as part of service to Kishori Temple. And in these interfaith meetings, it was predominantly a Korean group that had a leader, and I don't recall his name perfectly now. And they had a predominantly Christian outlook, and also present in these interfaith meetings would be some Muslim persons, and usually a Buddhist would be represented, and then ourselves representing Vaishnavism, Krishna consciousness. And I was actually really struck by the extreme difference between the Christian perspective of God as the creator and almighty versus the Muslim view, which seemed to me to be much more approaching something of the idea of personality, God having a personality. So when the Muslim representatives would express themselves, there was always some mention of some sort of love for the Supreme. When the Koreans representing Christianity, or their version based on their leaders' view of Christianity, there was very little mention of personality in relation to God. And it was quite a graphic thing, sitting around a table and hearing the views expressed. So in some sense, the Christians were certainly reducing God to something nameless and formless. The name and the form of the leader was highlighted, but God himself was pretty nameless and pretty formless. So in fact, it made it difficult to think of having a relationship with God. They seemed to hold on to the idea that, you know, you could have a relationship in some sense by revering the leader, their leader, but God seemed to sort of fade into the distance somehow. The connection was not made clear that even this personality was a representative of God, and if he was a person, God was a person, you know, therefore there was a connection in terms of the reverence given to God and the reverence given to this person. But the connection was never clear with the Christians. Now, Gopi Pranadhana Prabhu, he explains something of, and this is what Krishna and Balaram will also be learning when they go to Sandipani Muni's Gurukul. They're going to be studying the Upanishads. So here from the Upanishad, there's the Taittiriya Upanishad and the Katha Upanishad. And they make statements. So first from the Taittiriya Upanishad, Tantriya Upanishad, there is the absolute truth is real existence and consciousness unlimited. So, very impersonal, but there's a reality to his existence, and he's got unlimited consciousness. So that is made clear. And then from the Katha Upanishad, one can know it only to the extent of saying it exists. So this was a lot what I was hearing from the Muslim persons. So acknowledging that existence and putting an emphasis on that greatness of God and the reality of his existence. So seeing him as Almighty God is seen an expanded form of Krishna. So from the Vedas, that expanded form is actually Krsnarcana Vishnu. So the personality of Godhead who sleeps on the snake bed of Anantashesh in the spiritual causal ocean. And this Vishnu is the Lord of Maya, or material nature. And he exerts his absolute control over her simply by glancing at her once. And the description is, this glance agitates Maya's equilibrium by the glance and causes her to give birth to millions of egg-like material universes. Into each of these universal eggs, Lord Vishnu enters as a further expansion, Garbhodakshai Vishnu, who in as many forms as there are universes, lies down on the water that fills the bottom half of the universe, and who then directs the subsequent evolution of creation in each universe. And in each universe, Garbhodakshai Vishnu also exhibits various pastimes. And that's where we come to hear about his incarnations. So he has an incarnation of Lord Matsya, Lord Varaha, and many others who appear through himself. And so it is that the Lord, and this is the term coming from text 8 that I quoted from Srila Jiva Goswami, he regulates the Maya potency of material nature and exerts his control through further personal expansions. So it's a very intricate understanding of how God is the supreme controller. We actually hear it in this description that I've just given. So I did not once hear anything like this from the Muslims either. So it's a much more intricate explanation of how God is the controller. Now, the fact that Vasudeva and Devaki are having this kind of perception, understanding this expansion of Krishna, this Krsnarcana Vishnu, and then his further expansions, this experience of God as Almighty, you could say, is of Lord Narayan or Lord Vishnu, who is the principal expansion of Krishna, and who, in the realm of Vaikuntha, rules with inconceivable splendor. And he's usually called the Vilas expansion of Krishna, meaning that splendor component. So that's why, you know, the other religionists that I was hearing in these interfaith meetings, particularly the Muslims, were putting a lot of emphasis on the splendorous aspect of the Supreme Lord. So Vasudeva and Devaki, their desire to love Krishna in a particular relationship, by virtue of its intensity, is known as pure love of Godhead. So they had such intensity in their desire to love him that therefore it's called pure. The purity is so, it's interconnected with the intensity of the desire of the person to love. So this kind of love of Godhead means that one has completely given up love for any other person. So that's quite something. So the affection means that the affection is reposed completely upon one person, such that the affinity for any other persons is withdrawn. So this is what's indicating something of that purity of love, that intensity. Everything is reposed on the Supreme Person, all one's love. So there are, in fact, two conditions under which this love can be transferred to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these are the two conditions. One is out of ecstasy, and the other is out of the causeless mercy of the Supreme Person. So that's how it becomes possible to actually transfer this love, all one's love, to the Supreme Person. And this is Srila Prabhupada who gives these two conditions in Nectar of Devotion. So indeed, when a devotee is always associated with the Lord in ecstatic love, this is considered to be a position that's been awarded by the Lord himself out of his extraordinary mercy. So Srila Prabhupada writes that it appears that a devotee who always thinks of the Lord and who always chants his glories in ecstatic love, regardless of the conditions, will come to this point of the highest perfection of unalloyed love. So this is referencing again that idea that there's a difference in the perfection of the love, whether one is existing in a state of experiencing awe towards Lord Narayan, or if one is existing in a state where one is experiencing this intense love that's exclusively reposed upon Lord Krishna. So coming to that has to do with always chanting Lord Krishna's glories in ecstatic love, regardless of whatever one's condition is. Now, in other words, a devotee who is incessantly thinking of the form of the Lord is to be known as a pure devotee. So one has to have this form in one's mind, the form of Lord Krishna in one's mind. That's what allows for that ecstasy, that's what allows for the ecstatic feelings to become so pure in their expression that one is actually taking on a particular role in relation to him, and he's taking on a particular role in relation to oneself. And here Vasudeva and Devaki, they're watching Krishna as he expands his internal potency, and we're going to come to here. He expands his internal potency, so he's using his super spiritual strength to cover their awareness of his godly powers. So it's very subtle. It's like just obscuring an internal awareness of him in his Almighty God feature as Lord Narayan. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains it like that. It's just covering their awareness of that aspect of the Lord. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he states that it's the nature of Maya to bewilder the devotees. So one gets confused or, confused in some kind of way. And this was the part of this purport that it's reprinted here in the Bhagavatam, but it's coming from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and the credit is given, and I had read it. So I'm just going to repeat it. That jana may be translated as janayate, which means to generate or give birth to. So jana in this verse, jana mahini, means that Krishna was about to expand his external illusory potency so that Vasudeva and Devaki would again love him as their child. So the awareness of the feature of God as Almighty would fade, and they would again go back to the relationship with Lord Krishna and seeing him in that role as, oh, he's our son. So Krishna has that incredible power that on a very subtle level, he can actually alter the awareness and the perception of his devotees. And Srila Prabhupada, in Nectar of Devotion, he describes how it is that a devotee comes to be in such an exalted position, which in itself is due to his mercy, his extraordinary mercy. So on account of following the strict rules and regulations of devotional service, one becomes attracted by the supreme greatness of the Lord. So that's an initial thing. It's very natural that one's attracted by the supreme greatness of the Lord. So all the Muslim representatives in the interfaith meetings, they were in that state. They were definitely very attracted by the supreme greatness of the Lord. And then one is also attracted by the transcendental beauty of the Lord and by the spontaneous execution of devotional service. So those things follow one on the other. Because to be attracted by the transcendental beauty of the form means that one has understood the Lord has form. So already one is shifting from just seeing God as Almighty to seeing God as a person. So one carries that form, one starts to experience ecstasy out of seeing that transcendental form of the Lord, in our case the deities, and carrying that form in our minds. And by executing devotional service, one's acting in relation to the Supreme Lord as a person. So I came across a very interesting evocation of experiencing the transcendental beauty of the Lord, and it's actually something from Lochan Das Thakur in his Chaitanya Mangala. So this is him talking about the beauty of Lord Chaitanya, and I'm about to end. I'm sorry, I'm about 3 minutes late. And it's because there was a very long introduction. And this is Lochan Das Thakur talking about the transcendental beauty of Lord Chaitanya. Who has made those attractive eyes by adding a touch of yogurt of love to milk, and thereby producing thickened yogurt of intense attachment to Krishna? Who has added honey to his words and his sweet smiles? Who has rubbed lightning onto his body and the moon onto his face? Who has created the picturesque beauty of Lord Gaurasundar? So that's Lochan Das Thakur, experiencing transcendental beauty of Lord Chaitanya and questioning how it's come to be that way. So Krishna's intention in wanting to shift this awareness of Vasudeva and Devaki seeing him as Almighty God, it's explained by Sridhar Swami. And this is how he explains it, and I'm quoting. If I am simply, Krishna talking, and Sridhar Swami having insight, if I'm simply satisfied, then what knowledge will remain inaccessible to them? On the other hand, pure love for me is difficult to achieve with the idea that I'm their son. So Krishna's very practical. He thinks, well, if I remove that awareness, they're still going to have all knowledge. Because after all, in relationship to me, that knowledge is there. But having the relationship itself, that's what's difficult to achieve. So it's easy for me to just wipe out the awareness. So that explanation, or Krishna's intention, is explained by Sridhar Swami. So Krishna now in what's coming up will come to speak in such a way as to make or to invoke his parents' love for him. And Krishna wanted to enjoy with them that ecstatic love, that rasa of relationship between parents and children. So that's as far as I've gone, as far as this verse is concerned. If there's any thought on the matter, and I know I was quite philosophical, but somehow it called for it just to understand this very subtle point made in this verse.
Thank you, Mataji, for the nice, beautiful class. Is it like Krishna is all powerful, so he's the one that's putting the love within his parents? Is it like that? Oh, I know it has to be like this somewhat, but he's the one that's causing Devaki and Vasudeva to have love for him. So what do we play? What do we come in at as a devotee or a person?
Yes. Well, the explanation is there that the role one is playing is that there's a gradual increase in the intensity of one's feelings towards Krishna through practicing or abiding by the strict rules of devotional service, meditating on his form, and Krishna's part of being the transcendental personality he is. He's actually responding to one's efforts. And that responding to one's efforts takes the form of increasing transcendental ecstasy in oneself, because he's a transcendental personality that one is relating to. So hence the exchange is on an ecstatic transcendental level just by virtue of him being a transcendental personality. It's a very pure, perfect love. And yeah, I gave the explanation of how it comes about. Thank you.
There is also the explanation that is given that the terms is used Ashraya and Vishaya. That the devotee is the Ashraya of Prema, and the Lord is the Vishaya of Prema. So the Vishaya means, that the Lord is the object of Prema. And the devotee is the shelter of Prema. So the living, the jiva, or the pure devotee is actually, that love is fully sheltered on the devotee, and that love is directed to the Supreme Lord. So the Lord is the object of that love. So in one sense, you can say that that is, Prabhupada sometimes in the purport, I think, of the Parandharma verse in the second chapter of the first canto, Prabhupada explains that the essence of the devotee or the essence of the living entity is love. So it's already it's who you are, it's your essence. So it's there in a sense, as you mentioned.
Thank you very much for adding.
Hare Krishna. Can you hear me? Huh? Hare Krishna. Thank you for your class. You made a lot of wonderful points, and I actually really loved this verse when I saw it the other day, because I was meditating on something with his devotee. He used wrong. Would you rather emphasize to pay anyone to do anything? They did it on themselves. They volunteered. They renounced everything. But if you don't feel that love there, then you have to tell so many people what to do, you know. Since time is running out, I'll share one nice quote. Maybe you could expand on it. It's regarding fish. Of course, we don't eat fish. The quote says, I think it's from Confucius or something. He says, "Rule a kingdom like you would cook a small fish. Don't overdo it." And so for us, it's don't rule a kingdom like you would cook sweet rice. Don't overdo it. And I've experienced from watching the pots where they're, I love the devotees cooking, but definitely they overdo it a lot. And I'm scrubbing for like 2-3 days, literally. And so my question is that one pastime that I could think of, there's many pastimes, but we see practices when we're trying to cultivate devotees, we see that just like a mother will raise a child, she sees that, oh yes, my child may make so many mistakes, and he may bring me artwork that's pretty bad. It sucks, but she knows in due course of time this artwork will eventually mature. So we see that devotees may make many mistakes, but they have this love, this creativity, and we see that. I'm kind of formulating a question like a comment, but maybe you could expand on it. We see that sometimes the propensity is to always focus on what a devotee is doing wrong. But we see a mother never does that. Oh, this artwork, it sucks, which it does suck. It does suck. But she knows that's not going to have that would keep their loving relationship going. She knows in due course of time the child will mature. So can you expand on this when we're running the community? How much is so important to focus on the love, and even if there are mistakes, that in due course of time, Krishna is within our heart. He could correct their mistakes more than we can. So maybe you could expand on that.
Yeah. This idea of being tolerant and non-judgmental towards others that are practicing devotion to Lord Krishna in his personal form is a very delicate topic, extremely delicate. And why it's delicate is that each particular person who's trying and making effort to cultivate a relationship with Lord Krishna in his personal form means their heart is open. It's wide open, because that's what's required in practicing love, a loving mood towards Lord Krishna. So for persons who have a judgmental view or look for faults in a devotee whose heart is open in that way, it's a very dangerous thing, because it can actually cause a great deal of pain, particularly because the heart is so open. So it can verge on cruelty, in fact. So one has only to look at how a spiritual master deals with mistakes in their disciples. And one sees that it's always as a friend, as someone who is supportive, as someone who gives room, who points out the mistake, but is done in a very loving mood. And there may be even suggestion for how to actually move in a more positive direction. So there's always a sense of support. And that's the perfect way in which mistakes can be dealt with. The other is can be quite cruel, actually, particularly because persons have their hearts open in coming to practice devotional life. So it's very delicate for a person not